We're finally live here for the panel. Thank you for your patience and your sense of humor, because sometimes things run over and they go long. So let's see here. I feel like I'm talking down to this thing. So getting started, thank you all for coming. This is a panel that I put together with an all-star cast here. Some of the panelists you're probably familiar with or you may know. We'll get to introductions in a minute. Let's start with myself first of all. I'll be moderating the panel. I am, let's see here, getting used to this. I'm Steve Tout. I've spent a little over 15 years working in the identity and access management space. Hit the eject button on my IT career to get a little bit more focused in business. I've ran through several startups. I've worked in some Big Four consulting and so forth. And so there's some learnings over the past several years that I'm looking forward to sharing with you in some of the insights, and also bringing some of the insights from the panelists with you. So, my perspective on the industry is on the outside looking in. I don't work for a company. I'm a reformed technologist, MBA student, as it were, and a podcaster. So it's Nonconformist innovation. What we're hopefully going to be looking at today are unconventional. If nonconformist scares you, there's a synonym you can think about, which is unconventional insights, that we're going to be exploring today. So as we're jumping into that, we have 3 panelists here, and maybe I'll just give each of you a minute or 30 seconds to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Steve, and great to be here today. I'm Julie Talbot-Hubbard. I lead our identity, access management, data protection, privacy, and risk management at Optiv. Prior to joining Optiv, I've been in the industry focusing on cybersecurity and data technology for a little over 20 years.
Thanks, Julie. Hello, folks. My name is Shreyas Sadalgi, Chief Business Strategy Officer at a company called Better Cloud. We do zero-touch SaaS operations, and we focus on the user lifecycle management automation aspect of governance for SaaS applications. I've been at the company for the last 6 years, and my role is corporate development, corporate strategy, partnerships. And prior to this, I was at a company called Centrify, and prior to that at Blue Coat Symantec. So I've been in the identity space for a few years.
I'm Richard Bird, and my focuses recently have been learning how to make tiki cocktails. I have an original 1959 tiki bar in my basement in the house that we bought here in Denver. I also have the only residential international regulation size shuffleboard court that I'm aware of in the state of Colorado. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else remotely interesting.
The guy with the bow tie.
Yeah, well, and then the bow ties, yeah, but not shuffleboard with the bow ties. And if you do anything in identity, you may know my background, so I don't bore people with that detail. Just, my wife always says it sounds like a bad Tinder date. Just Google Richard Bird identity, and you'll see plenty of stuff about what I do in identity. So I'm really glad to be here today, Steve. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks to all of you for coming. I conceived of this panel and the idea for it, and I was thinking, well, people don't want to just hear from me about sales. Well, because I haven't had a career in sales, I've dabbled in it a little bit. I've been a startup CEO. I've done some advisory work in cybersecurity focused practices, and so several folks came to mind, and you 3 were my first choices, and each of you said yes. So I didn't have to think of anybody else to join. I'm really grateful to be able to have these set of folks here to talk about 5 strategies. So this is an interesting, a little bit different kind of a session than you're probably used to at this conference. By show of hands, how many of you are in sales? Maybe 5 of you. Okay, so I'm going to keep talking, and I'm going to ask that question again. It seems like wherever we go, whether you're working in IT, whether you're working in a leadership, whether you're doing business development or talking directly to customers, we're all selling all the time. If you have kids, you're selling them on a better bedtime, or shutting their phone off at 9 instead of midnight, and trying to sell them on the idea of better hygiene when it comes to using their phone. So, the ideas here are really simple. nothing happens anywhere until somebody sells something. Well, let me put it that way. And so what we're going to do here is just explore some ideas to help each of us who are in sales to be more proactive, to be more effective. And so the first nonconformist, getting a little ahead of myself here. So the first nonconformist or unconventional insight that I want to explore that you can think of is to stop selling technology. So realizing that most professional skill sets need to evolve from a technology-focused one to a business value creation one, from a reformed technologist to being able to speak the language of business. If you think of it this way, you may work in IT, you may be a technologist, but you're actually in the risk business now if you're going to be effective selling to your customers or working within your organization. So just one note here, I think a couple of years back I was speaking with a CISO in a pretty high-profile company in Silicon Valley, and I asked how many pitches and sales pitches he gets in a year, because he must get a lot of them. And by the numbers, he said he receives maybe 3 to 4 good sales pitches in a year. Let that sink in. Busy CISO, 3 to 4 of the sales pitches that he gets in one entire year are effective. So I want to kind of dive into this question here. Why are so few professionals making the shift from a technology focused to business value creation focused? Is there a rhyme or a reason to help them move looking beyond their own domain to improve working with the business? And what could they do to improve on their communication and their effectiveness?
Well, jumping into that topic, I think I should give the contentious statement warning. The next few things I'm about to say may irritate some people in the room, so I apologize in advance. I've been on record for several years saying that the biggest gap in understanding how to resolve business problems with technology is to first and foremost recognize that technology is a means of production. Sadly, over the last 50 or 60 years, we've turned technology into something similar to Harry Potter and Hogwarts, right? It's mystical, it's magical, you don't understand it, and bits and bytes, and we've got engineers trying to sell stuff to business people, and the reality is that technology is a plow. Technology is an axe. Technology is a sawmill. Technologists do not like to hear that. That's why I wanted to make the contentious statement warning, right? Because you never, ever could imagine a situation, going through the last 150 years where the plow salesman is explaining all of the engineering marvels of the plow, right? The plow salesman looks at the farmer and says, this will do the job that you need to get done, right? And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we have today is that we do tend to gravitate or get pulled into engineering nits and gnats conversations as it relates to technology solutions. And then we're really, really shocked as solution sellers when our customers actually take our solution and somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50 to 60% of the time implement it and use it in ways that we didn't even design it for, right? And why do they do that? Because it's a tool. It's a means of production. So I think that if we recognize that what we're doing is facilitating great business outcomes, better crops, higher revenues, better, actual sale prices, better results for the customer in terms of the business outcomes that they're looking for, and we place technology in its rightful position as a means of production, it makes those conversations a lot
Richard,
more
would you
easy.
recommend then that maybe the Identiverse comes with a Surgeon General warning?
Oh, yeah.
Blinking lights, squishy balls, martinis ahead.
Yeah. There's the point that you make is an interesting one, because I do think that one of the biggest deficiencies that we have, particularly in technology sales, growing up with an old school salesperson as a father, is that within technology sales, we have very few good storytellers. And to be honest with you, storytellers are what really moves the needle with customers, making those connections between the things that are important to them to, analogs and metaphors and stories that they can understand.
And so, Shreyas, I know that, having, worked with you and heard about your approach at Better Cloud, every opportunity that your team works on has a business value analysis at the front end. So you're clued into how buyers buy, the buyer psychology. They don't buy for technology, they buy for outcomes. So tell us about your approach and how you get past beyond selling technology.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of pick up from where this aspect of metaphor, right? This metaphor is important. So I'll start with the metaphor here, which is, if you think of the human brain, it's made of two systems, the rational system and the emotional system. And many psychologists have written about it. There's a famous book called The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, and he describes it really well with this analogy, right? So if these two systems are like a rider sitting on top of an elephant. The elephant is the emotional system and the rider is the rational system. And why is that? The rider actually controls and evaluates decisions in terms of like what's changing, what needs to be made in terms of options, and change the direction of the elephant. The elephant is actually the person with the drive and the energy that actually helps you move with any kind of new initiatives, right? So these two have to be harmoniously like playing well together, right? And similar to that, if you have a new idea as a technologist, you're oftentimes the elephant in terms of like driving that new initiative with a lot of vigor and energy. Then the rider in you takes over saying, well, let me now kind of step back and analyze the value for my organization. What does it mean for the rest of the company and not just for me as a champion? And so it's very analogous. Selling technology is reconciling that there's an emotional value and a rational value for any product, for any technology. And so what we did with that is that we basically put together a framework at Better Cloud for all of our sellers, because we're selling a very forward-looking like technology, and that's when we had the chance to kind of meet each other, Steve and I, where this is a new category. It's not really well understood amongst identity professionals as a modern way of doing governance for SaaS applications. So the value framework focused on three things: rational value, emotional value, and then finally benefits of the use cases. So the rational value is, what is the benefit for my organization as a company, right, in terms of outcomes and business outcomes and value and ROI. The emotional value is, how does it impact me as a person, as a champion, to move me up in my career, right? And the value from the use cases is about like quantifying the before state and the after state in terms of what are the pain points, and then seeing how Better Cloud as a product can achieve both the rational value and the emotional value, and quantifying that in terms of an ROI benefit, in terms of the cost, in terms of like what the payback period is. And what we basically enforced is any seller, before they put a pricing quote in front of a technologist or a champion or an economic buyer, they don't do that without accompanying that with a value analysis, a business value analysis. Because the price quote by itself doesn't mean anything, right? It's like a list price with a discount, but so what, right? If the champion and the organization can understand the value of the before and the after state, then the pricing becomes just like a means to an end to accomplish that value. So that's the insight that we've learned over the years, and we put that into practice, and it's been working really well for us.
And what we're experiencing and seeing every day, and probably in all of your organizations, and Julie, I'd like to explore this, having worked at Optiv and seen things from the inside out and also from the outside in. Optiv is one of the largest or the largest cybersecurity integrators on the planet, I guess. So you provide consulting integration for all of the major players in the space, but you don't go to market selling technology. Your vision is something more along the lines of, and you'll help me out here, like taming the chaos. You're not even addressing risk yet. You need to tame the chaos first, or reduce complexity, if as it were. So, how do you take that high-level view of engaging with economic buyers or influencers about selling before you even get to technology?
Yeah, and I would say that, and to being a security practitioner for 20 years prior to coming to Optiv, I would say we all sell to our, whether it be a CFO, if you're not the CISO, the chief risk officer, the CIO, all of those pieces. So, I would say from an approach perspective, what we do at Optiv, but what I've always done too is really trying to align, align your strategy program, what you're trying to do with the business, and understanding what those business outcomes are and what they're trying to seek. Today, more than ever, I truly feel that cybersecurity leaders can be an influencer and actually help drive business, whereas before we've always been more of that cost center across, and you're always kind of begging and pleading for that. But, from a advisory, what we're trying to do at Optiv, though, I mean, it's really of, understanding, if you think about a cybersecurity strategy, too, you're understanding what's most critical to the business. And so how do you widen that even further and look to see how can I help the business grow? And if you think about technology today, over the last year, 2 years, I mean, how we're engaging with consumers or clients, every business is leveraging technology now. Every industry vertical is. You think about healthcare, you think about everything. Payments, I mean, everything is now in the fingertips of the consumer. So any way, in my opinion, that you can align and figure out what are those business pain points today and to enable business growth, and then kind of step that back and see how does that tie, what do you have to do to secure that for the business, and creating those business relationships, and then kind of mapping the technology to those use cases. To me, you will get greater buy-in from the business and IT on resourcing, on funding, and also results for the business.
And that brings me to the second strategy that I'd like to talk with you about. If we've concluded and established after the first strategy that we're all in sales, now I'm going to give you a curveball. It's, build up your political capital. I'm just going to come right out and say we are all politicians. And you started actually answering this question too, because I think they intersect, right? Which is when you go to ask for money inside of your organization to fund your pet project or your new investment in a program or a technology, because of the nature of identity and access management going across the entire organization, someone somewhere is going to try to kill your deal and kill your project because it's taking money away from them or it's taking resources away from them. So what I'd like to explore here for just a couple of minutes is the importance of building up political capital. You don't need to, technical knowledge and whatnot is important, but a lot of times, and the longer I've been in this industry, I've come to really strongly believe we are all politicians. And I'll say this, and maybe it's slightly inappropriate, but you might have heard it said that politics is like sex. If you're doing it and it hurts, you're doing it wrong. What I'd like to do is encourage you to not be afraid of selling, and to not be afraid of politics, and to engage in it in a way that's politically correct inside of your organization and in your industry. So, question here, Julie, if you can extend what you were saying, how do the best leaders create alignment inside of their organizations?
Yeah, I will say when I join any organization, I always what they call like a stakeholder map. I really kind of, take a view on the organization and understand kind of who are the main players, decision makers, all of that. I also then look to see, build that relationship, that rapport with them, listen to their biggest problems, their biggest challenges, and really get to know them. I think that's really key, because when it comes down to it, and there's, it could be a cybersecurity event, it could be you need funding, it could be, there's a large audit issue that you need to be closed. Once you build that relationship, I think that really, you can begin to trust you, is I guess what I'm saying there. I think, though, the other piece, too, is always following up and following through. So I think that's something just from your reputation. I think that I've learned, too, joining new organizations, it might take a while to rebuild your brand, because your brand is really key. And, ensuring, though, from an integrity standpoint, you do what you say. It sounds simple, but it really isn't. And I think if they see that you're really trying to be a partner to them, most people are going to lean in. And I think right now with cybersecurity, with all the issues out there, you've got a leg up on them where you've got that knowledge and expertise that you can help them. So that's the approach I've always taken, but I'll turn it over to Shreyas. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think just to pick up from there, Julie, it's the way I've seen kind of some tips and tricks to execute that mission or play, right? So you have to have political capital, but how do you do that, right? So to me, it's all more of the objective versus the subjective. I think relationship building, stakeholder mapping is sort of the basics, right? After that, then where do you go once you have a credible relationship? Well, I believe you have to kind of win them over with the objective analysis of whatever the solution or the value that you're trying to pitch on. And that starts with data, right? Like build up all the data that you need to quantify everything around whatever initiative that is. And that's has worked wonders. But that's the hard thing about cyber and identity is how do you quantify any kind of value from a perceived risk or perceived risk of doing nothing, unless it's like an actual automation value proposition that you can really prove to automate a whole bunch of manual processes. And that's where you have to lean into some creative strategies to figure out, okay, how do you quantify cyber or identity risk from a global organization profile to your organization profile, and do some kind of a bridge building to kind of help that person understand the objective value versus it being all subjective. Rick?
And Richard, before you get started, I'm going to quote, you've multiple times, one-on-one provided clear advice to me, and it's always been eye-opening and really transformational in the way I think. And there's, in one conversation, I keep copious notes about things, by the way. Richard says, "My opinions are open for debate. However, if I present with data supported, that is not an opinion, fact and evidence. If theologically they don't accept that dinosaurs existed, then complete that thought," Richard.
Well, I just complete it with my advice that goes with that, right? Which is the way to be a master of corporate politics is to recognize that you argue from fact, evidence, and logic. If you bend towards arguing from emotion and thoughts and belief, like how many of you have sat around a table and somebody looked at you, gave your idea, and the senior person in the room goes, "Well, that's great, but I believe," right? Well, that's great. I like what you believe. Where's your evidence and your data that supports that, right? And I think that it's kind of strange, along with trying to become a master of tiki drinks and being a high-paid professional shuffleboarder in pro leagues. I am also struggling to become an author. And one of the 2 books that I'm halfway through writing is actually called "Stop Sucking at Corporate Politics."
Oh.
And every time I say that, I see about a half a dozen people that are like, "When is that going to be out?" And most of those lessons were learned at, I won't name the company, but the world's largest bank. And one of the things that you hear frequently from people when we're talking about how to get your ideas, how to get your program, how to get your funding, one of the things that I hear very, very frequently in the corporate world is, "I hate corporate politics." And my response is then you must suck at corporate politics. And you kind of get this look, and I'm like, you know what? Steph Curry doesn't wake up in the morning and go, "Man, I am the best three-point shooter possibly ever in the history of the game, and I hate throwing three-pointers." Right? That is not part of his conversation, right? We become masters at what we practice. We become masters at what we, you learn how to utilize. And if if I saw some physical reactions in here, if your reaction to corporate politics within your environments is, "I want to run and hide, I hate it, it sucks," you're not going to get the support that you need. I'm sorry to deliver that news, but you will not get the support you need. Understand that every day within your company, there are 2 types of players. One player is playing checkers, the other player is playing chess. And chess can have good win-win mutual benefit outcomes for your colleagues, partners, peer executives, if you're thinking 5 and 6 steps ahead. If you're playing checkers, you're never going to be successful. It's just the way that the corporate world actually functions.
So I think if you're frustrated with this process, you're not engaging with stakeholders in a effectual way, or at least there's always room for improvement, I think. I wanted to just say that, within this area that, let's see here. Oh, I think you captured it. Just, the idea that, this is the game, right? There was, one CIO that I worked for in a previous company said that, we were working in IT at the time, that IT is a contact sport. You need to wake up and go to work every single day with the knowledge that you're in sales, and now we've established that you're politicians too. And you might even use the, this bullet point as the subtitle for your book, Build Up Your Political Capital. Okay, so we're going to go to the third idea here, just an idea. You could use it as a strategy, which is the third thing you can take away from this session is stop using logic. You don't need to go to your next proposal with, I think positive ROIs are good and compelling, the financial analysis and impact of a deal. Shreyas, you were talking about, the logical and the emotional side that goes into selling. But because of the game that's being played in any given environment, on any given deal or project, there's someone that's either going to try to kill it or take credit for it. So you need to understand that there's, an interesting dynamic or political charge, if you will. You might ask yourself the question, and I did this throughout my career as well, am I being a good partner? What is your partnerability index? And figure out how to improve on those, softer skills. And so if you look at your logical mind as, delivering the financial analysis, the positive ROI, the low TCO, that's not the reason the company is going to buy. You've heard it said that companies buy for emotional reasons and back them up with logical ones. So we're going to dive into this section here. You've already talked about business value analysis. Maybe, what are some of the metrics that you're using to measure on the, the irrationality, the emotional scale, in terms of are your potential influencers or customers supporters of yours? Are they detractors? How do you measure and assess and figure out, Julie, you said you create a stakeholder map. But going beyond the stakeholder map, then how do you assess the quality of the relationships? Who do you work on influencing first?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so picking up from from a strategic narrative versus just pure logic, that does appeal and play heavily into the emotional value when you appeal to the person, right? So what does it mean for them in their career? So as an example, in Better Cloud, our strategy is about driving every company to run their SaaS applications effectively through efficient IT operations. So that's where SaaS operations comes in, and that's why we're a SaaS ops company. And what we want to appeal to the modern IT practitioner is you have to care about SaaS ops as a practice, because it is a board level conversation, right? Which is, what is an organization doing about SaaS applications from all aspects, governance of data, identity, as well as security of the content inside those SaaS applications. Now, once you appeal to that as a board level strategic imperative, then the person plays a role where we actually canvas the person to actually change their titles if they buy into the SaaS ops practice. So we see, to answer your question, Steve, the impact that we measure is saying, is Better Cloud having an emotional impact or not? Is after they've implemented the solution, they change their title sometimes to SaaS ops engineer, SaaS ops architect, SaaS ops manager. And that to us is one way to measure the impact. The other thing is we've seen is these people move into the next role or next job in another organization, and they carry the flag saying, hey, I need to implement Better Cloud and need to implement SaaS ops as a practice. Only then will I be successful in my new role in identity management for modern SaaS applications. And so what we've seen is now the word SaaS ops and Better Cloud starting to appear in resumes and just in terms of job descriptions and requirements. So that's another way we measure emotional impact and value, where we're making people successful, not just for the short term, but for the long term, right? It's very durable, it's high fidelity. And that's just a strategy that has worked for us. Julie.
Just to add on to that, I guess, when I think about strategic narrative, I go back to the storytelling comment that we talked about early on. And I think that's where I always, I think it's more of, I think logic you have to have. If you're going to go work with the CFO, I've always got to show efficiencies or some kind of cost cut. There's something there, part of it. But I think building that larger story and that narrative and tying it back to the business. Again, if the business is trying to achieve X, Y, Z, I've always found that's where the funding is, and that's where you're going to get your support and your priorities. And I mean, even 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago when companies were starting to go to the cloud, I mean, I tried to tie all of my security initiatives to those cloud projects, because I knew if I could weave those in and really build a narrative on how like security essentially is really helping, or identity, helping grow that. I mean, that's more of that strategic narrative, but make sure you tie everything to it in that regard. Richard, anything to add?
A little bit different take on this. Show of hands, how many in your working career have ever worked for a true strategic, visionary, forward thinker? Like, how many of you worked for somebody like that? Anybody? All right. How many of you have worked for 3 somebodies like that? I can stop at 3? Okay. So the reality is that human beings, I actually, my academic background is in organizational behavioral psychology, which is really strange, but very helpful. And it's really interesting, the vast majority of human beings, whether we choose to admit it or not, which is a self-reflection statement on my part as well, we are very petty, self-absorbed, self-interested, self-focused, even in our professional careers. So when we think about a narrative, I actually, in the course of either trying to get programs funded or stand up a new massive IAM transformation program, I am worried about one thing, and that is, whoever the key decision maker is, how do I explain what it means for them, right? Should that be the case? No, we've got vendor management, we've got RFPs, and we've got POCs, and we've got all this other stuff. But if you don't convince the critical decision maker or decision makers what difference it makes for them, you will not be successful. That is the target for the strategic narrative. What is the story that you're telling that resonates with that self-absorbed, petty, senior level executive? And I'm not saying those in a negative way. I'm just saying this is the way that we all are. Like, when an organization change happens within your company, what is the first thing that you ask yourself? What's it mean for me? You're not like immediately going, I'm really, really concerned about all of my colleagues, all of my friends, all of my peers. I'm going to go check with all of them. The very first thought that runs into our heads, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is what does it mean for me? So think about not just a strategic narrative, but think about how do you target that strategic narrative to answer that really, really important question. What does it mean for me?
So to sum up this section, so if stop selling technology, we're all salespeople, and building up your political capital, we're all politicians. So in this situation, we would all be value creators. And I think what Richard just said is important to realize, that you need to realize who you're creating value for. Some of you might have some trepidation about, we're like on a business trip, and if I submit an expense report that goes above my, I don't know, what if you overspend on your trip to Denver this week, are you going to get your hand slapped? Or are you going to go back with a compelling narrative about all the things that you learned, and how, or at least start thinking about how you're going to create exponential value for your organization to cost justify the $2,000 to $3,000 that you spent on this trip? And I want us all to be thinking about that more and more as we leave today, that we are not going for the low-cost option. We're looking at maximizing the value wherever we happen to be working or playing. In MBA parlance, this might be called a Pareto-optimized solution. When you're working with multiple stakeholders, you want to find the ones that are trying to kill your deal and figure out how to partner with them. You want to find the ones that are trying to take credit for your deal, figure out how to partner with them, and figure out a solution that can optimize your approach for all the stakeholders. You can't please everybody, but I think this is what we're trying to do here, is look at the overarching narrative that you can build for your organization versus just you yourself and your little silo and your personal economics of your project. And so we're going to get to the next section here. We'll try to keep this going at a brisk pace, because there is a break after this, so we can stay a little bit longer if you want to stay a little bit longer, but we won't have to rush out. The last presenters didn't rush out. And then hopefully we're going to try to leave a little room for questions. So this one is called Earn the Right to Opine. So if now you're sellers and you're politicians and you're value creators, you can't just rush to work on Monday and start dishing out great advice of all the things that you learned, designing new strategies, and having a one-way dialogue with your stakeholders about the new changes that you want to bring to the organization. I want to reframe this as a conversation that you have to have. And as we can all see of each other, we have 2 ears and we have 1 mouthpiece. So I think it's designed to listen more than we speak. And when we're leveraging listening as a superpower, we can increase our effectiveness. And so for you iconoclasts out there, nonconformists, that doesn't translate into a license to be disruptive or to be the bully on campus or in your organization or workplace. So I think this is a really important topic to discuss. And I've been accused on multiple times of having sharp elbows in my organization. And I wouldn't disagree with that. But over time, you have to develop other skills that you can use your sharp elbows when you need to, but you can use political savviness and partner skills to influence and be effective. So we're going to jump into this question too, Richard. How do the contrarian thinkers, including yourself, approach selling situations differently than disruptors? And let's look at the role that social intelligence plays in this situation, like coming back to that career conversation that we had, and share with the audience.
Well, first and foremost, the single characteristic that you need to think about in your life relative to earning the right to opine is you need to, if you don't have self-awareness, I really feel sorry for you. If you do have self-awareness, that's awesome. It is a learnable skill to be able to understand yourself, to measure your sharp elbows in the environments that you're in. But you have to be self-aware because I can tell you from the standpoint of what I do now, after I got done with 20 plus years in corporate, I thought I knew a lot. And I was really, really happy to tell people I know a lot. And I was really happy to tell people this is what you should do. And as I've been going through the last several years, that tune has changed substantially. I'm not an expert. I am somebody that went through the bruises and the scars and the battle wounds of standing up one of the largest centralized identity functions 12 years before anybody did. And you know what? I still talk about the same problems from 12 years ago. I still talk about AD hygiene. I still talk about all this nonsense that's not gotten fixed. And what I realized was I don't know anything, right? Mark Twain said I am getting dumber as I get older, right? And what he's saying is that as part of that self-awareness, the additive piece that you bolt in order to earn the right to be able to tell the story, the narrative, to be able to close the loop with whoever can make the decision is humility, right? Being humble and having an opinion can be very, very powerful when they're put together. I'm not saying like game the system and be faux humble, right? I'm saying recognize that there's this vast universe of stuff that you don't know. And, forgive me if we're, being recorded for using this term, but nobody likes a smartass, right? Nobody likes the person that shows up in the room and says, I'm the expert, right? We immediately just dial down, right? What they want to hear is I'm the person that's in this with you, right? I'm here to figure this out with you, and I don't know everything, and maybe together we don't know everything, but maybe we add more to it. You earn these rights to be able to deep dive into these really important, valuable conversations and funding and all that kind of stuff, only after you've proven that you're self-aware and that you're humble enough to admit that you don't know everything.
And that's improving on the partnerability index, right?
Yep.
And as we shift right on this question, I'd like to add in the complicating factors of women and minorities in the workplace. How do those challenges? How can we continue to be effective, navigate power structures, have a more inclusive workplace, and not allow that to be a liability to us, but actually an advantage.
I think, Richard, you have more to add here, but I'll just kind of add one more thing to your previous commentary on balancing that act of humility, but also always be on a learning journey, right? So just one anecdote I'll give you is we have 4 company values that we have put in place, and we've finished 10 years as a company. And look, every company has values and cultures, right? I just want to give you these snippets because what Richard said like really resonates into our values. One of the first values we have is humble yet hungry, right? So it's not just about gaming the system and pretending you're humble. Combining humility with the fact that, hey, I'm always here to learn and grow, and that hunger, right? So that's one value. The other value is impact through outcomes, which is, again, anything that you do needs to be impactful. Strive to delight and make sure that you delight every interaction with a customer, partner, or employee. And it's frankly like it's those two things, right? The humble yet hungry, and then the fourth value is in this together. That's just really back to that, right? Which is like you combine, you kind of mix these ingredients, and that's where you have this winning combination of always being like able to learn and grow. And so always be closing for sellers, but always be learning as practitioners. But I'll hand it back to you, Richard, for the question that Steve asked.
Well, okay, so especially on the issues of diversity within the workforce, I'm actually going to keep my comments short because I want to pass that down. I'm going to say this as I know this might be obvious, but as the multi-time C-level executive who's the old white guy, I'm going to say this from experience in my working career where I've been in situations where I've had the opportunity to lead very, very diverse staffs globally. If you are a senior white executive in this room, the piece of advice that I can give you about how you include people, I hate the term inclusivity, that's an adjective. Include is a verb. You have to actively be a part of growing opportunities within your organization, and the best way to do it is if you're someone that looks like me, shut up. Right? I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. What I'm saying is that we are trained in the business world as white executives to show up at problem-solving meetings with the answer already. And we leave no airspace in the room for all the great people that we've hired and allow them to speak. And the most important thing that I've learned over the last several years is be comfortable with silence. And then invite people to be a participant in the conversation and shut up and listen.
It's really powerful.
Yeah.
And Julia's been very patient, by the way, I'll say.
We want to save the best for the last on this topic.
But I do like the be comfortable with silence. So I'm going to just talk about a few things here. I think one, the right to opine. I do think, Richard, you shared a couple points, and Steve, you did as well. I think listening, I think, is a key part, understanding problems. And if you're seen as a problem solver and one that's truly like in it with that person, like you're going to build political capital. All these things are going to happen. You're going to build relationships. They're going to know you're not in it for Julie or yourself. You're in it for the organization, for them. You're there to help. But back to comment even on diversity, on the other things. I think it's a true statement. I've been a woman in technology for 23 years. And even where I'm at today, there's meetings, there's calls, I'll just be honest, where I've got to try to get a point in. I'm waiting on Zoom, trying to jump in. But I do think if you allow others to participate, to collaborate, to bring their ideas, again, I go back to the political capital, I go back to building relationships. They're going to, you're gonna build your own political capital right there because people know that you're an inclusive leader and you're going to provide them opportunity to grow and expand in their career. And I think that's really critical. I think that, if you look at just identity in general, there's a huge shortage on talent. We need to really open the doors for everybody and give everybody that opportunity. And that's something that I have a deep passion for. And some of it's just because I've grown up in technology and I've been here for many years. But I think it's also, that's how you get the best ideas. And I think from a problem solving, if you think about back to selling, who's the demographics you're serving? It's a diverse population. It's not just a single white or a white individual. But I think that that's really key on really inviting others and being inclusive. That's one of our core values at Optiv is inclusivity. And I think that's just, you got to invite others in to the discussion. You'll get the best best solutions that way. But also, all those four things we've talked about so far, you're going to build all those things at the same time.
So the last one, and it actually dovetails into exactly what I want to talk about, which is to turn the focus to you. I'm so grateful that you came to this, and I wanted to be able to create value for each of you, and I want to be able to leave you with this last idea. It's an idea that I discovered from listening and reading to Simon Sinek in just in the last couple of years, and the challenge that he gave that I found very powerful, which I think just changed only in the last couple of years. He said, you need to be the leader that you wish you had, if you let that sink in. And so I thought about the last 15 years of my career, all the crappy leaders that I had. I could create a long list of reasons why they were so shitty. But I identified the top 3 reasons, and if I'd used the Simon Sinek approach to identify, well, that's the leader I need to be, communicate with empathy, create value for all stakeholders, and so forth. And I would challenge you to think about that question as you leave. This one is about not giving up on yourself. Keep investing in yourself. I know for most practitioners here that probably very few, if anybody in your company, cares as much about identity and access management as you do. Is that a fair statement? Raise your hand if that's true. Okay, so we're going to just conclude on this thought, and then if there are any questions, I'd invite you to, to bring them. And this maybe just ties all the things together about the Surgeon General's label warning. How do you avoid the seduction of technology and make achieving business outcomes a shared priority? I think maybe we already talked about that one. Let's go to the last question here, because I want you guys to be able to ask questions too. And maybe let's make this a speed round, okay? What's one principle or philosophy that you can share with the audience that has helped you to achieve and enjoy the extraordinary careers that I know you have?
So I'll start. I would just say getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's a really, I think that what I've learned is I've had individuals that believed in me and kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I never would take the leap. And that's something I think that for you to grow and learn, you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's when I've learned, grew the most in my career.
Yeah.
Speed round, Shreyas.
All right. Be the person you want to be, right? Just play the role that you want to be. And back to that comment that Julie made, right? I think of every career move as a quantum leap, right? It has to be a quantum leap where you feel the discomfort, feel the challenge, and that's the right. Then it's the right move for you.
Never be so comfortable with your own ideas that you believe your own advertising.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
And that was taught to me by my dad.
We could go on and on and on, maybe for another couple of hours. And I love these subjects. This just barely scratches the surface on them. And just in concluding on this topic, I hope it's answered a lot of your questions. Our industry needs effective communicators, effective salespeople, effective politicians, effective value creators, effective thought leaders that come to business and to work with humility and looking at creating value for others versus just what's in it for me. So, there's one thought a VP I used to work for used to say, and I just want to share that. It's one thought, and then I just want to open for questions, and we'll wrap up. Our most important job is to make sure we innovate with the business to achieve shared goals. And with that, I'd like to invite you all to, if you have any questions, raise your hand or speak up. And if it's for any one person, let us know. Okay.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much. It's amazing. Second of all, thank you for you to accept that the octave was misspelled and you just didn't mention it. That's good. So it was extra key at the end. But the thing is, I've heard this, I've been in conferences many, many years. Guess what? Starting 2010, I remember the topic, stop selling technology, selling business, repeating over and over and over again. We're not going anywhere. Is it time to actually start creating master classes when you work individually with people in the audience about that, and having a great scenarios and kind of start working on it? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely opportunity for helping, I'm going to be very, very specific, technologists be successful in selling, right? Because the reality is that, and I don't mean to offend any engineers. I manage engineers, right? But the reality is that much of the engineering community has been convinced that smart is good enough, right? There are an entire woodpile of some of the best solutions you've ever seen made by very, very smart people that are all now bankrupt or dissolved companies, right? In fact, it really frustrates us that we're working with people that are really, really bright engineers, that companies that really only do 80% of the solution for a business problem have massive valuations. While my company is focusing on 100% of a specific problem, and I can describe it in detail, but nobody buys it because nobody buys the engineering story, right? So I think that there's definitely room for that. I'd be interested in your guys' opinions as well.
Yeah, I think the one way we put that into practice without designing a course and trying to change the whole world is putting together a buyer's guide that we've put for practitioners to actually help. Like, basically, it's a cheat sheet to do that. That's one best practice.
We need interactions because all of us have experience and all of us have some story to tell. And maybe working with experts like you can help us in a very specific situation, because all of the general ideas, as I said, for 12 years we did the same thing. But I think there's more individual one-on-one type of or one-on-a-group, and I've seen that working in the different areas. Is it time to do the same here?
I think that's a good call to action, right? So for any conference for that matter, right, there's always, I think what you're alluding to, there's a technical track for like mastering your certifications, your skills, but there's not that track of saying, how do you sell with value for maybe this company's solution, and maybe just create a track for that. That's an insightful idea and a good call to action to the conference chairs. Any thoughts from you?
Any other questions? Blue shirt in back. What's your name?
My name is Willie Clemens.
Hi, Willie.
Birmingham, Alabama, for the EBSCO Industries. But do you think I've always told people on my team when I hire them, I want smart people, I want communicators. If I can't trust them to be in a room with somebody in management, then I may not hire them even if they're really smart. And I always say you need to be comfortable with that. I always think you should wait tables until you get comfortable talking to people. But with COVID, and we've gone to this remote workforce plan now, and everybody's staying home, do you see that it starts getting people kind of revert back to being hiding in the corner? I mean, when I was growing up, going through school, an IT person was sitting in the corner just coding, and they didn't talk to anybody. And that's not the world today. But now we're getting back to where they go back to their home, they don't go anywhere. They sit in front of a computer, and they don't even put their face up on Teams, and they don't talk. And maybe discuss how you might be able to address that.
Well, I would agree with you on the communications. The cybersecurity teams I ran years ago, I took them all to a communications class where they actually filmed you and critiqued you and helped you. Because what I saw, the challenges we had in this organization, I was leading security, the security team was kind of locked back in their doing vulnerability scanning and not really going out and communicating, and again, sharing that strategic narrative, building that relationship with those other business leaders. So, I mean, I think the communication is really key. And I don't know if it's really from a class perspective, if it's, even having a meeting, because people hide behind emails quite a bit as well. And I mean, I'm working in escalation right now that we've been hiding behind emails for 35 days. And I picked up the phone and called someone this morning. And I don't know if it's I think sometimes it's conflict too. They're afraid to have that conflict. And so we've got to figure out how do we teach people to have those crucial conversations, or again, if you even look at these 5 strategies we talked about today, like, again, that alignment with somebody, getting people to get comfortable, having those conversations, I think is really key. And I don't know if we teach it more or have more sessions on it, but I think as technologists, typically, I mean, people gravitate towards being on the computer and being alone.
And as a leader, put the person that's quiet, put them in charge of the next meeting and have them run it. But also as a manager, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that everybody is engaged. It's not the employee's responsibility for themselves to be engaged. I think if you look at what each of them is contributing, one of the, I told you I identified 4 leadership, in being the manager or the leader that I wanted to be, one of the 4 was identifying the genius in everyone. And so I would want to look at those quiet ones, figure out what their genius was, and nurture their comfort and encourage their contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we're considering as a company to put into practice is, especially to deal with this hybrid situation, companies are trying to bring together employees just for pure team building or like just motivation and just like dinners and lunches as a way for them to come on site, right? One way to kind of extend that is like to Steve's point, like if you want to implement a learning program or a professional development program, you incentivize that program to always and only be held on site, and it forces people to come and participate in person in real life, and second, like nurture their actual strengths, right, based on like what they're good at and what they want to be good at.
Any other questions? Well, I have a podcast that I could recommend.
Yes, Steve's podcast. Rereading it for the 3rd time is The Black Swan. If there's anything that will kind of shatter the way that you think, I don't think that there's a better book. Talib Nassim wrote that book 12 years ago now. And now reading it the 3rd time after a dozen years of additional experience, it reads differently. And I think it helps me every time I read it.
One book I just finished is called Backable, Backable. Backable is how can people back you? Like how can you become more backable in any role, entrepreneurship, like technologist, practitioner, and it was written by a fellow colleague, ex-colleague, and a friend, and all real-world examples from technology companies and business companies in terms of how you can become champions and become backable.
And I don't really have one book. I read several, but I do more podcasts, I think. Follow like Be Leaderly. There's different sites I do, more for women, but many of these things tie to that.
Well, maybe we should have you on my podcast, Julie. Well, I have a book recommendation, which is Simon Sinek's Infinite Game, and that's where the question came from. Be the leader that you wish you had. Question?
So for the scenario Richard was talking about earlier, where you have a team of really bright engineers who solved 100% of something deeply technical, but they're so focused in that they're not seeing that, they're not having those think big, seeing the strategic narrative. What are some ways, things that you've executed on or ideas that you have for how to lead them to see that larger strategic picture and to sell strategic narratives within the organization?
The one that works most frequently, that I use the most commonly, is make engineers show up for a customer implementation. Engineers tend to be detached. They're doing single point solutions for very specific sets of requirements. They never necessarily see the entire holistic picture. Or you can talk to engineers in your own organization. Many of them don't even understand what they're contributing to in terms of solving a business problem. They know that they've been told to build X, but I think that giving folks that are in the highly technical end of the spectrum the opportunity, or forcing them to interact with customers and business operators will go a long way. Many of them will really, really resist that, though. I understand that. So
I can tell you from my experience, I was an engineer in the past, behind the desk, and crossed over the dark side when the sales leaders started to pull me into SWOT situations on customer sites to say, hey, like this is your code, go fix it and make it work. And that's when I had this kind of nirvana moment saying, like it's a holistic system and not just like one component, right?
And I would just add, I think what Richard said's, fantastic. Getting them involved with the customer, the client, anywhere on that part. I would also say mentorship, make them or have them go get a mentor. If you're in an organization, have them go, work with somebody in the business. So they start to understand the business and understand what they're creating, like what it supports, what's the output, what does it influence, impacts as well. So if you're in healthcare, have them go, like I've supported technology CISO at a healthcare organization, like have them go understand like what they're doing, how it can impact positive and negative. Because I do think that people, they're wired to do the right thing, but I think sometimes they don't, they just have a siloed view.
Julie and Shreyas and Richard have achieved a mastery. They're masters, and I've studied them. There is one thing that Richard failed to mention that I'll add to answer to your question. If you're trying to sell a strategic vision, make it easy enough to communicate to put it on your t-shirt. So when you go to a customer meeting, they can read it and they understand what it is. So make it simple and clear, easy enough to understand. So I kind of want to wrap here. I know you probably want to take a break before the next session, but how many people here are in sales?
All of us.
Yes. How many of us are politicians? All of us. Strategic narratives are so important, right? Come to work with humility, earn the right to opine, and invest in yourself. Don't give up on yourself. And that's what I have to offer today. Thank you so much.